Saddam Hussein was a bad guy, right? He was a bad guy, really bad guy. But you know what he did well? He killed terrorists. He did that so good. They didn't read him the rights. They didn't talk. They were a terrorist. It was over. Today, Iraq is Harvard for terrorism. You want to be a terrorist, you go to Iraq. It's like Harvard.
Whether you agree with Donald Trump or find his comments to be insulting, it remains one of the most pressing issues in global politics. The continued massacre of the Syrian people by their own leaders, their flight to wherever they can go to in order to avoid becoming the next to be butchered. Countries overwhelmed with refugees, with nowhere to put them. Citizens of so many countries, America included, who are seeking both security and humane answers to the issue. The presumptive Republican nominee has suggested building camps of a sort to house those seeking to escape a war-torn country, with many behind him calling this the truly humane thing to do. Is it? And who will this reflect on in the American role in the current Middle Eastern discourse? And how will it affect us as well? Let your comments be part of this. Get on the line right now. Be prepared with an opinion at 1-877-NEWSMAX, 1-877-639-7629. Always a pleasure to welcome back a great friend of the show, Professor of Middle East Studies at Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton, Florida, and the author of Salafism in Lebanon, From Apoliticism to Transnational Jihadism. Welcome, Dr. Robert Rabil, back to the Hardline.
Professor. Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
To see you. It's my pleasure, El. Thank you again for inviting me.
Always a pleasure to have you here. With regard to Syria, I'm going to get to that in a moment.
Please.
But I want to react to what Donald Trump said when he made those comments about Saddam Hussein. You know the region very well. You know the history. When he says, and his followers will say that what he meant to say was that Saddam Hussein kept the terrorists out of his country, and that was the good part of him being a ruler. But how do you react when you hear somebody talked about in that way who butchered 500,000 of his own people?
Well, the context and the way he said it, it wasn't precise, because Saddam Hussein indeed was a tyrant and he killed a lot of people. He killed a lot of innocent people. And he was at one time a sectarian ruler. Mainly he went against the Kurds who wanted their autonomy and against the Shia, and he excluded them from power. And he also committed war crimes. He threw chemical weapons at the Kurds. So from that perspective, I really disagree with what Mr. Trump has said. From the other hand, you know, when he said, well, he kept the terrorists at bay. Yes, because he killed everyone who was against him. So that was his policy. But I wouldn't say that, you know, that Iraq under Saddam Hussein, you know, was a utopia or ideal society. No, it wasn't.
This is not a good comparison to make.
Yes, it wasn't. I believe he didn't mean it this way, and I'm hoping that he didn't mean it the way he spelled it out.
Let me then get to what we talked about here at the beginning, and that is what's going on in Syria. Also something that Donald Trump said in his press conference last night. He has said this before, but he mentioned it again last night. The idea on how to keep Syrians from flooding into the United States, and here's what he said.
We don't have the money, but I'll get the Gulf states to put up the money and we'll supervise it, and we will build wonderful as it can be in Syria, safe havens. We'll build safe zones and we'll keep them there. We don't want them here. We don't want them here.
There's a two-part question to this. A, could you ever get any of the Gulf nations to get involved in something like this and pay for it, as he says? And second, safe havens, would they work at all?
All right. The first part of your question, indeed, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar has been paying money to support the refugees. And I know, you know, based on my field research trip last year, I went and I visited a number of refugee camps on the border between Syria and Lebanon. So on this one, you know, the Arab Gulf has paid money. Now, what the Arab Gulf didn't do is that did not take any refugee. And this is where Donald Trump said, listen, you know, you want to help? Why don't you take some? And really, this is not only Donald Trump should say that. This is Donald Trump, United States, and Europe, and our allies. They should. Why you are not taking? You have the land, you have the money, and you have the buildings. So why you are not taking? You know, Germany, a country that took 1%. Over 800,000. You know, you mean to tell me Saudi Arabia cannot take 100,000 or 200,000? So this is where
they could take a million, quite frankly. They have that much room available.
They have room and they have the money to give them.
So is it just a matter to say that this is religious hatred that cuts down the line here?
Well, as a matter of fact, I look at it more. I look at the Saudi, they are worried about their survival, about their political survival, and they are worried that, you know, these people are Sunni, true, they are Arabs, but at a certain date in the future, they might go against them. system. And this is why it's all about political survival and staying in power. And this is part of the problem, that Donald Trump somehow tried to deal with.
But would it work, I guess, is the question, when we're talking about building these safe zones?
Safe haven. Okay, safe haven is different. Myself now, I think now you have a new realignment of forces. Turkey now is speaking with Russia. Saudi Arabia has seen now there is an impasse. It got stuck in Yemen. I feel myself now, if you have a strong leadership, that strong leadership could indeed work to create a safe haven, but not before. Speaking with Russia, Turkey and Saudi Arabia, and especially with Russia. And I believe this could be done now. So probably now, this is the time where we could say to the Russians and to the Turks, especially after their realignment, you know what happened now? Turkey has said, listen, I have more priorities than removing the Assad regime. My priority is to protect my national interest. And this is why you have now a new mending offenses with Russia. So what do you have now? A new configuration in Syria. And that new configuration at this time, I believe myself, it could allow for some room to create a safe haven.
You talked about Saudi Arabia needing to basically protect themselves as well, their concern as well. So let me ask you this, whether it's Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, anybody else who is in power at this point, does the United States have the power in order to turn the screws on Saudi Arabia and these other countries to make them do this?
Absolutely, because I believe now the ground, the configuration, as I see it in the Middle East, it's ripe for a strong involvement, strong leadership involvement by United States. What we need, I believe, we need a strong leadership with a sober plan. Why? Because, listen, Ed, Syria now and the refugee problem is a tragedy, bigger than any other tragedy. And what you have now in Syria, you have an impasse. You have now a realization that the Salafi jihadi are all bad. They are attacking Saudi Arabia. They are attacking Turkey. Those two countries that at one point they supported them. So now they said, oops, what's going on now? It's backfiring on us. And more so, as a matter of fact, military on the ground, you have an impasse. You have an impasse. So what you have now, I believe that you have a room for a strong leader, United States especially, to go there and say, listen, it's about time to go ahead and push for a resolution. Now, I am not disillusioned. You have still some time to go about it.
Here's a quick comment. Here's Sandra from Altoona, Pennsylvania. Sandra, thanks for joining us. Now, you believe that safe zones are a good idea for the refugees. Why?
Well, because it's in their own country, and they would not have to adapt to anything else. They could hold their own customs. They could govern their own selves. They would have everything they need within their own country. I think it is a terrible thing that all these refugees are out there where they could be rezoned within their own countries, even start helping turn the tides.
Okay. No, that's a good idea. That's a good point here. One more. Mars from Baltimore, Maryland. You also believe that the safe zones are a good idea. 30 seconds. Tell me why.
The safe zones are a good idea because you won't displace the people from their lands. And then when things can get reconciled, they will be there to help build the land back to where it should be. And we just need to have stronger leadership. Apparently, over the last 7.5 years, the administration has been backing the wrong people in that region and not helping the right people in that region. And it's unfortunate. And we're paying the price for it.
There it is. I think that's...
So are the people in Syria. The administration has a lot of blood on their hands from not stopping that line that they drew in the sand.
Okay.
They didn't do anything about it.
What you said in there, wrong people and right people, is a good part of it. Thank you very much. I got about 60 seconds left. These are all great ideas here, but aren't we skirting the main issue here, that we still have a butcher sitting in charge in Syria, and nobody's doing anything about him? So instead of building safe zones and safe havens, which is a great idea, wouldn't it be better to get in there, get this killer out, and at least find some sort of government that can run that country without the people having to worry about having their heads cut off?
Okay, you can do both things. Myself, as a matter of fact, I can go, and as I mentioned to you, now it's the time to speak with the regional countries to go ahead and try to build safe haven, and at the same time to go ahead and try to have an alternative leader. Myself now, I am a little bit worried about going and removing the regime. The regime is not going to be removed as long as Russia and Iran and Hezbollah are fighting. But what you can do now, you can find an alternative to Assad and his higher echelon in the government. And can be done. Can be done.
Which still takes, and I'm going to come back, you and I always circle back to the point that you make. It takes leadership.
Yes, absolutely.
Somebody, it doesn't make a difference who it is, has got to take the leadership role, and has got to decide, as I used the phrase earlier, turn the screws and don't walk away from this and get it done.
I fully agree with that.
You and I are going to go ahead and do this.
Thank you.
You and I should. Always a pleasure. Once again, I want to remind everybody, the book is Salafism in Lebanon, From Apoliticism to Transnational Jihadism. You will learn more about what goes on in that region by reading this book over and over again than you will from a lot of the so-called experts. Professor, always a pleasure. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
The issue over national security and if Hillary Clinton is fit to be trusted with American secrets. That and a whole lot more coming up next on The Political Animal, and more of your phone calls right here on The Hardline.